pleasure to introduce our next speaker who's actually going to host and moderate this panel. Stuart Rogel has been a great leader in this region for quite some time. He's currently the managing director of Grayling Consulting, a business and management advisory services company. Previously, Rogel served 21 years as the founding president and chief executive officer of the Tampa Bay Partnership, the 8-county economic development organization representing the Tampa Bay region. Guys, it's with great pleasure. This will be a very enjoyable session. Let's welcome to the stage a great leader in economic development, Stuart Rogel. Knock it out.
Thanks very much, Jeff. I appreciate that. And I really appreciate being able to moderate what I think is going to be an incredible panel. And I'm going to ask our panelists to come up. Frank DiBello, who is the president and CEO of Space Florida. As I call your name, come on up and take a seat up here. Chris Hart, who's the president and CEO of Career Source Florida. Jesse Panuccio, the executive director of the Florida Department of Economic Opportunity. And Bill Johnson, who we heard from earlier today, Florida Secretary of Commerce and president and CEO Enterprise Florida. If you all don't know these four people, then you don't know economic development in the state of Florida. So I've dispensed from doing the backgrounds and introductions because we all do know and we all work with these individuals every day. And they truly are the leaders of economic development here in the state of Florida. And it's a real pleasure, particularly given the theme of this conference, Florida leading the way, to be able to have these four gentlemen up on stage at the same time. I think it might even be a precedent setting that the four of them have spoken to, certainly FEDC at the same time. So we're excited to have them. It's part of our theme of working together and partnering, as we heard earlier today and we've heard throughout. And so it really speaks nicely to that idea of collaboration and working together. We've got a number of questions we want to ask of the panelists. And we also, as Jeff said, want you to start thinking about the questions you want to ask. We're going to take a few minutes before we break for lunch to be able to do some Q&A with the audience. So let's get started right away, and let's just jump right into these questions. I've asked our panelists to keep it short, keep it tight. We can come back to elaborate on any of the answers they might have so we can get through and hear a lot of different topics and a lot of different perspectives from these four individuals. So let me get started right away. I'm going to start with Chris Hart. Chris, you've been here since, I think, 1998 when you were elected as a state rep, and one of the first things you did was introduce an economic development bill. Tell me a little bit about why is Florida on the upswing, and how is Florida better today than when you first came onto the scene 10, 15 years ago?
Okay. No, thanks, Stuart, for pointing out how old I'm getting. A lot has occurred since that time period. If you remember back then, the road fund was our #1 incentive that we used in economic development. Remember when the road fund was an economic development incentive? Yep. We did not have a closing fund at that time. We didn't put that in place until 1999 when we ran through one of the first economic development packages. We didn't have the innovation fund. We hadn't focused yet on life sciences. There was no Workforce Florida, now of course Career Source Florida. Our public-private partnership, Enterprise Florida, was still in its infancy. We didn't have Space Florida. We had various space programs. We were a little disenfranchised. We didn't have Visit Florida, although we had leisure and hospitality. So in other words, if you think about what we were doing back then, it seemed much more piecemeal. We still looked at economic development holistically, but we hadn't necessarily assembled ourselves so that we could collaborate as fully as we do today. We weren't necessarily focused on a common shared vision. We didn't all understand that business is our customer. And guess what? Business is our customer. We weren't always primarily focused on the product that we deliver. And in Career Source Florida and the Career Source Florida Network, we understand that the Floridians that we serve and the workforce development solutions that we provide to help those Floridians enhance their market-relevant knowledge and market-relevant skills are our product. We also understand today that the taxpayer, because let's face it, we're all primarily utilizing either federal or state funds, the taxpayer is our shareholder. And so a lot has happened. We're on the upswing because we do know who our customer is, we understand our product, We understand the value that we deliver to the marketplace, and we are relentlessly pursuing our shared objectives.
Great, thanks, Chris. We're going to just go sort of right down the line, and same question to you, Frank. Why is Florida on the upswing? What do you see, and what's changed? What's different from your perspective?
Clearly, by the way, I was supposed to get the tallest chair, and I'm not happy about that.
We can
It's all right, no, it's all right. Yeah, that would please me, right? From an aerospace and space, especially a space perspective, I think Florida's time has come. Thanks to the work of multiple governors, but especially this one, and legislatures, current and past, the work that they've done with respect to creating a low tax environment and a very friendly business and regulatory environment, and all of the things that we usually list associated with quality of business and workforce life. The aerospace industry has recognized that Florida is the place to be for their next generation operations. And that's important for us. It really means that that's where they're looking. A couple of other factors impact that, though, that in contrast to a decade ago, if I look back at a decade ago, a number of aerospace companies were looking to leave Florida for places of what I call high workforce centers of excellence, like California and others. They were also looking to move to innovation centers of excellence, like Silicon Valley or the Research Triangle in North Carolina, South Carolina. There were a number of spots that were attractive. That situation has completely changed today and reversed itself for a number of factors. I think for the past 20 or 30 years, companies have been placing their facilities in different states to obtain political diversity and strength in Washington. Today, as we're facing an era of tight federal budgets and even sequestration, and this is true globally, companies are looking to consolidate and to place their next generation facilities in places where they can be very, very competitive, and especially manufacturing facilities in places where they can reduce the number of touches on next generation manufactured products and gain a competitive edge. Florida fares very well in that. And from that perspective, I think Florida is the place to be in the next decade or more for aerospace.
Perfect.
So that's a complete change.
In fact, we heard, and we might come back to it a little bit later, that Price Waterhouse recently ranked Florida #1 for aerospace manufacturing attractiveness. So that's where we want to be. How can we be #1? We can talk about that a little bit later. Jesse, what's changed here, and why is Florida on the upswing from your perspective?
Well, thanks for the question. And first, let me just say it's a privilege to be on the stage with these three gentlemen and with you. And I think this is the first time we've done a panel together, oddly enough. So,
I think so.
Good to be with you, Bill, and glad to have you at Enterprise Florida. At DEO, we, of course, look at the overall labor market statistics. And I think if you look as compared to a decade ago, everybody knows and has heard me speak on sort of the difference between the recession economy and where we are now. But going back a decade, it's actually pre-recession when there was a lot of job growth in Florida. I think the difference today is that we have a much more broad-based, diversified economy, and we're really working on that diversification. I think if you look at the economic fundamentals of the state, they're a little better today in a recovery economy than they were sort of when we had a bubble economy. And I think we're not in a bubble today. I think the growth we're seeing is much more strong and rooted in the fundamentals. So that would be one thing. And two, I think we have better debt now. I think our budgeting is more careful now, thanks to some of what the discipline Governor Scott has brought to the budget process. So again, I think it comes down to the fundamentals. And then lastly, we have iPhones now. We didn't have those 10 years ago, so that seems better also.
Is that
but
good or bad?
That's not really, I think it's good.
Good, great, thank you. And Bill, we'll put you in the wrap-up. You shared some of this in the morning, but your thoughts and your response to this.
Well, good morning again to everyone. It's a pleasure again to be with you. I think it's a great question, and my three fellow panelists, I think, have responded to it in the appropriate, correct way. I've lived in Florida 35 years, and so I listened to all three, in particular to Chris and to Jesse's comment, and it rings very, very true. Florida today is much different from when I moved here in 1980. Florida has clearly matured as a state in all regards. And I think the number one thing that has brought this about is, again, both at the state level but at the local regional level, working together. as I look at this audience and the different organizations that are in this room, it's really the success, your success, and the joint success working with us on this stage is what really has brought about the difference, I think, for our state. And the most important thing, I believe, going forward as we sell Florida, and again, we're all in the business of selling Florida, is the opportunity, if you will, to have that clear, shared vision. So the number one thing I think that we offer as a state, besides incredible workforce training and our investments in infrastructure, our investments in education, protecting the environment, all the things that Governor Scott has really has been aggressive on, along with job generation and job creation over the last 4.5 years, and all are succeeding. But the number one thing I find companies, large or small, that are interested in coming to Florida, it's quality of life. And it's amazing to me, it's interesting to me that over the last several months, companies that are moving to Florida with no interest in receiving state incentives, that's a good thing because we have fewer state incentives, financial incentives from the closing fund to offer. But what they're really interested in is having a conversation or discussion in terms of where is Florida headed. The quality of life is here today. Crime at a 45-year low, all the things that really make this the attractive place for us, not only to have a business, but to have a great way of life for us and our children. What that really means is, and what people are interested in, what will that look like 10 years, 20 years from now? Are we, the leadership in our state, at the local level, are we doing the right things in terms of being good stewards for not just the economy, but for the environment? So, hey, we're the place to be, Florida.
Great, good, beautiful, beautiful. All right, next question. What is the single biggest success or initiative your agency has worked on that you believe will propel Florida into the state leader role in economic development? Frank, I'll ask you to lead off and we'll come right down the line.
Well, I guess as I think about that, for the past actually 6 or more years, we've had the goals with respect to the aerospace and space industry of diversifying the industry away from our historical reputation as just a launch state. Diversification of the industry, and then also growing and deepening the supply chain in the state. And the single biggest success factor, I think, in our achieving those goals, Stuart, has been our ability to hone and refine the creative use of the financing tools that the legislature gave us under statute, which allows us to provide next generation infrastructure to companies seeking either to expand or to grow or relocate in Florida. And these are very powerful incentives in themselves. They're less, as has been mentioned, less interested in many of the back-ended incentives and much more interested in the things that enable them to come into an environment, set up operations, and operate truly in a competitive, low-cost way. And our ability to provide those facilities really does give them a competitive edge and gives us a differentiator with respect to their evaluation of us versus other states. And that's pretty significant.
That's a great success, very significant. Chris, your perspective.
So I might tackle this from a little different direction than what you might expect. I was talking about our business as customer, and very proud of the successes that the CareerSource Florida Network has had. We have many of our partners here with us today at FEDC. Thank you. 118,000 plus businesses we've worked with. That's an increase over the prior year. 236,000 plus high-value services to businesses. That's an increase over the prior year. Over 14,000 projected trainees as a result of QRT and IWT, Quick Response Training, and Incumbent Worker Training, so very proud of that. But remember I talked about who our product does. It's the Floridians that we serve and those high-value workforce development solutions that we provide that help them to enhance their market-relevant skills and knowledge. Over 445,000 people were placed into jobs this past year alone. But then I talked to you about the taxpayer shareholder. And I brought this book. We have many of them and love to share this. And it goes through, in essence, a true return on investment, if you will, statewide, but also by every one of our 24 regional workforce boards. And we had to go back to 2013 to get the data. So I need to read this one to you. But in 2013, nearly 600,000 who entered the system unemployed left the CareerSource Florida network employed. So just think about that. So what do you think the taxpayer thinks about that? I'm sure they like it. Part-time individuals increased $6,400. That was their pre-service to post-service. Full-time increased their wages $11,445, pre-service, post-service. Now you're going to love this. Total earnings differential for those served, $1.8 billion. Total earnings impact to Florida, $9.8 billion. That's huge. Think about our gross state product. Jesse knows it well, talks about it. 70% of that is derived from consumer spending. So imagine a $9.8 billion in Florida's economy. So very proud of that. I'm going to take just a little bit longer than I told you I would, Stu. I apologize.
Watching the clock here.
I told him to give me the slash sign if I go too long. All right, that's actually not what I'm most proud of. CNBC, you track it, so do we. They're checking to see which states have the best business climate. What did they do this year? They ranked workforce as their #1 high priority, high weighted measure as they looked at our 50 states. IEDC, it's our national affiliate, if you will, or we're their state affiliated. Member survey, skilled talent workforce needs jumped as a priority from 33% in 2013 to 56% in 2014. Largest increase in any single issue. It's now one of their top 3 priorities. I've been hearing a lot here, and I believe it's one of ours as well. Coming Jobs War, Jim Clifton. How many of you have read it? If you haven't, get it. It is required reading for all of us. And this is what he says. The coming world war is an all-out world war for good jobs. Not just jobs, good jobs. Think about what we're here to do, economic development. The McKinsey Global Institute, I'm loving these guys, been spending a lot of time with them as a matter of fact. It's a quote out of one of their recent reports. Advanced economies will succeed on the strength and quality of their human capital. Strength and quality of their human capital. Therefore, education, workforce training, and winning the global war for talent, there it is again, global war, means will be seen as vital economic priorities. In fact, a government could choose to make human capital central to its economic development strategy.
Good.
On the theory that where the best talent resides, innovation will thrive and investment capital will follow to support all kinds of economic activity. Now I'm going to answer your question, Stu, and this won't take very long.
I thought you did.
Yeah, I know. Now that was all the setup. So here's what I'm most proud of, candidly. Our board put a stake in the ground 5 years ago, and they said that we will build a talent supply chain. We will build a total talent delivery system. This year, for the first time ever, through the Higher Education Coordinating Council, which we serve on, along with all of our educators, public and private, they took a unanimous vote that business was their customer. Let that sink in when you're talking about talent. If education believes that business is their customer, that's huge. But guess what the rest of the motion was? That they want to use the labor market information that comes out of DEO, the business intelligence that comes from all of us, coupled with the ability to forecast, to build their curriculum, their programs, and their work experience. That is helping us to meet the needs of our customer business.
Perfect. Good. Thank you. You did answer it.
All
Thank
right,
you.
I'm done.
All right. Jesse, you're up.
You know, in terms of thinking about the single biggest accomplishment for DEO, there's a lot of specific initiatives I could point to, the way we've changed due diligence, the way we've changed incentives to a pay-for-performance model. We have a major initiative on fighting unemployment fraud, which matters in terms of protecting taxpayer money. The Competitive Florida Partnership is a focus on rural economic development, but I actually think it's what DEO represents, which is a change in mindset for the state government. And this really is what Governor Scott brought to all of the state agencies, and we're kind of a focal point for that. But that is that the role of government in Tallahassee is not to have citizens of this state and businesses of this state ask permission from the government for what they can do. It's to protect public health, safety, and welfare where it needs to be protected, and then otherwise get out of the way, keep taxes low and regulations sensible, and let the businesses grow and let people live the lives they want to live. And I think DEO, the change in name, the change in philosophy, the change in the way we do business is represented in that global change in the government in Tallahassee. And I think you can hear it when you go back to local communities and they talk about what's happening in Tallahassee and what it's like to work with us. So I would say that's the biggest accomplishment.
Great accomplishment. And Bill, from your perspective?
Well, Enterprise Florida is about to hit its 20-year mark, so it, as an organization, is still relatively young. And I've been there 5 months, but over the course of the 20 years, the organization has had an opportunity to, in some ways, reinvent itself, but to look how it could be more responsive, how it can be most effective. When I took the reins on March 1st, that clearly was my objective. I wanted to make sure that the organization was truly listening to its partners, both in Tallahassee, as well as the gentleman on the stage and others. And that's very important. It's important even though EFI is not a state agency. We're a public-private operation with private sector board members. And we clearly appreciative for the support we receive, both from the Florida legislature in terms of funding, but also from our private board members. But it's important that we partner really closely with Jesse and with Will and with Chris and with everyone else, including Visit Florida, with the state FDOT. It's very important that we have continual, constant communication, that we're working in partnership. When you think of EFI, EFI is one half, and really, truly, Jesse's the other half of the equation. So our respective staffs work daily together. You know, my staff is out actually working on the transaction, the deals, and Jesse is the safety check. He's actually doing the analysis, the due diligence in terms of protecting the state's investment. That's an important consideration as partners. And that's one thing Governor Scott expects, that there is, as Jesse said, close working collaborative relationship, if you will, between all of us in the state capitol. But just as importantly is making sure that EFI is focused on our customers, our partners at the local regional level. And again, that was the purpose and continues to be the purpose of the road tour, to hear what's on the mind of our local and regional economic development agencies. How can we at EFI be a better partner, a stronger partner? So if there's one thing that I'm continue to be focused on, and with the support of my board from EFI, is that we are looking to make sure there are not walls, there are no silos, that we're working effectively together. The second thing I'm proud of, again with the support of, I think probably all of you in this room, and thank you very much, the first time for EFI, the opportunity to receive state funding, in this case 10 million, 8.5 million of which is recurring, with great leadership and support from the speaker, but many of our legislators who really stood up in support of the 10 million allocation so that we can properly get the word out globally on what the great state of Florida has to offer as the premier business destination globally. So again, a tribute to all of you in this room for that effort, and thank you very much. Those are the two things that we've been focused on, working on, and I'd be remiss if I didn't say that we will continue to keep the eye on the ball, working with our legislators in terms of the proper amount of funding, the resources necessary for the toolkit so that we are truly competitive.
Great. And you know, that marketing fund, you talked about collaboration and partnership. That $8.5 million recurring came about because of a partnership.
Absolutely.
Specifically focused on marketing with many of you in this room who've invested your time and money. So that's exciting that we can continue to work forward in that partnership with that kinds of funds. All right, let's get a little more granular. Jesse, I'm going to start with you on this one. This is a two-part question. What did the last legislative session provide for economic development? And what was left behind? What do we need to work on?
So I get to start with the question that's going to get everybody in trouble. That's awesome. Right. Okay, here's what I'd say. What did the legislative session provide for economic development? I think Bill already hit on it. The marketing fund was, we have been trying to get that in the DEO/EFI budget for 4 years.
Correct.
We finally got it, and we actually got it at a level that was higher than DEO put in for the budget request. So that was important and significant. The other important thing that we got during the legislative session is what we didn't get. There were a lot of, how do I say this diplomatically, worrisome ideas that made their ways into certain bills that, if enacted, would have been problematic for Enterprise Florida, problematic for DEO, and for you as local economic development officials. So as with every legislative session, sometimes it's the things left on the cutting room floor that are the most important, not what actually comes out. So that was significant for us. And the larger theme there is every year that I've been at DEO and every year I think that Governor Scott's been in office, there has been a bill that hasn't always passed to completely revamp the way we engage in economic development. And that's not to say that there are bad ideas in those bills, but at some point we just have to pick a system and then go with it and have a stable system that the agencies can implement so that the business community knows what they're getting every year. And so this constant tweaking and changing and revolutionizing of the system is very difficult for us as administrators to deal with. So the fact that that didn't happen this year is important. In terms of what we didn't get out of the session, I think we got some good things, more tax relief, but I think going forward we continue to need to push for getting rid of the corporate income tax and some other taxes that are out there. I know Governor Scott every year will have a tax package. I know in this room the commercial lease tax matters to a lot of people. So I think we've always got to think about the incentive money, and that wasn't funded at the right level this year. We need more. But we also have to think about making sure we have the #1 tax environment in the country, and we're good, but we're not the best yet, and when we can do better and there's more we can still cut so that even without incentives, every business is going to want to be in Florida.
Chris, from your perspective?
All right, I'll keep it short, give back some of my time. For the workforce system, we generally had a pretty good session, as a matter of fact. Specific to CareerSource Florida and economic development, you're always interested in a quick response training grant tool that was once again, third year in a row, funded at $12 million. Actually, 2 years in a row, funded at $12.1 million. Let me tell you what the 0.1 portion of that is. We've been talking about marketing. Marketing is very important. You have to market, you have to brand, you have to be able to tell your story. We have Lynn Pitts actually to thank for this idea. When he first came back to our state here and was talking to us, he said, you know, your quick response training grant program, it's as good as any of the others. Quick start, fast start, super quick start, whatever they call them. But he said, but you don't do a very good job of telling the story. And so what we've done is we've now begun to roll out something called Florida Flex. It's our opportunity to be able to tell the story. We've been able to take the $12 million, look at the statute, and be as flexible as we possibly can. So we now call it QRT 2.0. It's more flexible than it's been in the past. It's fast. You can now apply online. So we're using technologies. We're listening to the voice of the customer. They've told us how they want to receive it. It's more comprehensive. We can now fund, in some cases, equipment in addition to the training cost. And of course, it's proven, as we've seen in the McCallum-Sweeney report a couple of times, where they say that it's one of the #1 or top programs that you all use when you're closing deals.
Great. Going forward, anything we should be looking for next year?
Going forward, yes. What you should be looking at, I was going to cover this in a bit, but we have a federal law we have to implement. It's called the Workforce Innovation Opportunity Act. It's very important because it takes multiple federal funding streams, but this is why it's important to us. It is giving us the opportunity of a lifetime to once again put Florida's vision, Florida's stamp on how we do workforce development. In other words, how we do talent economic development.
Good. Thank you. Frank?
Well, I'd have to comment that the governor's office and the legislature again treated the space and aerospace industry very kindly in the sense that we did receive our full funding on our management and operations budget, which has been flat for 5 years, but nonetheless important every dollar of it, and that was funded at $10 million. We did receive $1.5 million for space tourism marketing, which initially was targeted toward building back the visitorship at the Kennedy Space Center, which did experience a decline following the retirement of the shuttle. Now we're rechanneling that to point out the fact that Florida is the one place in the world where the average global citizen can come to see a launch and easily come to see a launch. We're launching today at 2 launches a month, and we are the busiest spaceport in the world. We want the world to know that, and that'll help drive tourism here. We also received $1 million for a research collaborative effort that we have between Florida and the government of Israel. And then there was a $10 million allocation for a confidential project, which is not yet announced, but we're very, very pleased to see that there. So all in all, we're very, very pleased. Left on the table, there was a qualified defense and space contractor incentive that expired in the prior year and was put forward in a bill this year. Did not make it through the bill process, but I believe it'll come back in probably an expanded form, in a more robust form, perhaps even on a regional basis in the next year. And then we're also looking at continually supporting the elimination of the corporate income tax. That really will help this industry.
Great, thanks. And Bill, you've talked a little bit about the marketing fund, but you also shared with us that the incentive fund, we left some things behind. So what worked this year, and most particularly, what do we need to do next year?
Well, a couple things. Just quickly pick up on Jesse's point, which I think is a well-made point for the audience to pick up on. Oftentimes, what's not enacted, and there were a number of pieces of legislation that were moving through this past session, especially in March and April, not so much in special session, but during regular session, that really would have impacted both EFI and I think Jesse's operation significantly in a negative way. So this constant review and attempt to perfect the system legislatively is troubling. But again, we were fortunate at EFI, not just in terms of the marketing funding. There was great support in terms of funding for sports, for military. We're appreciative for that. The governor had made an $85 million request to the toolkit for the closing fund and other important parts of what we need to do in terms of incentives. Of that request, right at $43 million was allocated. So it's not the number we would have liked. But as I indicated earlier this morning in my remarks, we don't give up. We continue to focus on the upcoming session in January. There's quite a bit of work that not just that we on the stage have, but with your support in really educating in a respectful way, but working with our legislators to make them appreciate or better understand, let me put it that way, better understand what the opportunities are for Florida to really be a competitive player. I would never envision Florida, being in the league where we have $100 million in a governor's closing fund, even though that would be nice. But $43 million is not the right number. It's woefully short of where it should be because it doesn't provide us, myself and Jesse, the numbers to work with you at the local level to really help incentivize the expansion of some companies, but most importantly, bring in others. So I think left on the table is really the proper level of funding as requested by Governor Scott for the toolkit.
Great, good, thanks. Thank you for that. And if we're going to lead the way, and we want to be number one in some of these areas, we have to act and function as a number one state for economic development. So these are good things for us to be working on and for all of you to be thinking about how we go forward with some of this. I could ask a ton of questions. I'm only going to ask two more because I'm going to ask those of you to raise your hand and get some questions before we break for lunch. Frank, I'm going to start with you, but again, I want the whole team to talk about this. So taking Jim Collins' good to great concept, the BHAG, this is not Game of Thrones, this is good to great. What do you think is Florida's BHAG, big, hairy, audacious goal from your perspective? And are we in a position today to tackle that big goal?
Well, I'm going to restrict my comment not to the whole state and all of the range of markets and things that we could and should focus on, but to the aerospace and space industry. And I'd like to see us be the number one aerospace and space state, the place to be. And we are ranked number one for manufacturing by this group, number two by another group, number three by some other, depending on what factor you use. But I want to look at total number of jobs and total volume of business generated and the income contribution to the state. And right now we're not number one, but we're clearly positioned to be able to achieve that. And I think that ought to be our target. There are a couple of things driving that. I'm just going to elaborate on one other thing. That every other state competes for this same business. And that's particularly true in aerospace, but also in the space industry. Today there are some 19 domestic planned spaceports or existing spaceports, 4 of them in Texas alone. And one of the things I'm most proud of, and I should have added that to my list of accomplishments I was most proud of, was that we have wrested the control of our own destiny away from the dependence that we've had in the past on the federal government. For the past 50 years, the space program has clearly been federally dominated. But the Cape Canaveral Spaceport is more than the Air Force. It's clearly more than NASA, and it must be driven by us. There's a major state component today. Every one of the launches that is occurring at the Cape is occurring on infrastructure that Space Florida either owns or financially enabled. So as we look to continue that, I think we're well positioned to make Florida the leader in space and aerospace. That ought to be our goal.
Good. Thank you. Chris?
Am I up? Okay. I think that Florida needs to be the number one choice for business. And I mean existing businesses, evolving businesses, and emerging businesses. I think that would be our BHAG. But I think we have some obstacles in our way. They're not insurmountable at all, just like in Good to Great, Jim Collins, he gave us some ways to think this through. And we are good. But remember what he said, good is the enemy of great. And we're good. I mean, the numbers that we've given you, they're good. They're not great, are they? I don't think they are. They're good. But then he also goes on to talk about enduringly great companies. And it was those that had beaten the market, not some standard that they set, but those that had actually beaten the market time and time again. And he looked at those companies that beat it 15, 20, 30 years. I mean, they were enduringly great companies. We need to be an enduringly great state. And we need to be that choice for business. The obstacles are this, and I wrote them down. I was thinking about them earlier. I didn't know you were exactly going to ask this question, but it's culture. We've got a really good culture, but it can be better. We need to focus on a singular vision, mission. We need to understand what promise that we're giving to the businesses that we're working with and the Floridians that we serve. We need to understand what pillars in our world is collaborate, innovate, and lead. And we need to understand what our values are. And we have so much of this in common already, but I think that we need to bring it together collectively. How many of you actually serve with a board? How many of you have a board in place? All right, I imagine it's all of you. Guess who doesn't have a board in place? The United States Department of Labor, the United States Department of Commerce, the United States Department of Health and Human Services. And so we're talking about our federal funds. Think about it. There's no voice of business sitting there helping them to pass down what they call guidance to the Department of Economic Opportunity. So then we have Jesse and his team that are left with government minds thinking up government ways for us to use, guess whose money? The taxpayers' dollars. So I think we need to change the culture. And I'll give you one example that I think what we should do right here in our state. CareerSource Florida, we contract with DEO to serve what the board sees needs to be accomplished, the performance. But Jesse contracts with Bill Johnson and Enterprise Florida. I think that needs to be reversed. I think the board of Enterprise Florida should contract with government to carry out that vision and that mission and that promise that business wants to see in order for us to be the business destination that we want to be. And then finally, we need to focus on that customer. We need to focus on our product. And we need to remember who our shareholder is. And yes, it is the taxpayers. And then we need to collaborate. And by collaborate, I do not mean sit on a stage once a year or quarterly and talk about collaborating. I mean truly collaborating more fully. And I'll give you an example right there, and then I'll stop, Stu. Salesforce, 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 Salesforce. We all have customer relationship management systems, and guess what? It's all the same one. We've been talking about talent and how critical it is. Well, what do you need to know beyond labor market information statistics? Because, by the way, that information is very, very limited. You need business intelligence. We're all gathering daily business intelligence. If we could figure out how to collaborate more fully, and I know we have all sorts of issues with public record exemptions and confidentiality that may seem insurmountable, but if we truly want to deliver the skills and the knowledge required by business to have a total talent delivery system, let's figure out how to collaborate more fully with the programs that we already have in place.
Thank you. Jesse. Round of applause.
Really.
If I had to put it succinctly, I guess I would say this. We want the main goal for Florida, our economic success is so great and so compelling, and the quality of life in this state is so high that other states and the federal government cannot politically resist putting in place the same kind of policies we put in place to get there. We want to be an example for the nation.
Be the leader. Be the leader. Beautiful. Bill?
And I think that, with that said, that if you look at the 20-year history, and by no means am I a historian on this, but the EFI model that was stood up 20 years ago, and while it can stand some improvement, there's no question, because a healthy organization is one which looks both outward and inward for opportunities to improve and to strengthen your operation, EFI being no different. The model that we have in our state with our EFI and how it works is a model that's being replicated by other states around the country. One of the great honors back when I first started, 2 weeks after I started, I lost my top government guy who became my counterpart in the state of Arkansas. And that was really a compliment to not only that individual, because he's a very talented young professional, but also to EFI and the mission. I clearly agree in terms of the importance and I think the real opportunity for this collaboration, not just in terms with our state partners, but again with private sector, and when public and private come together through a real true collaboration, we win. I think the big goal that I would like to see, one of the things that I have clearly heard from you and from many others, roughly the 10,000 miles I've traveled over the last 5 months, our state and the communities want us to really aggressively sell our different industries. We all know the success of Visit Florida and tourism, but they really want to see us looking at advanced manufacturing. They really want the opportunity to grow these different life sciences in the financial sector, trade and logistics. They really want these areas, these opportunities to grow high-paying jobs. The state has never been successful, and we clearly understand why. It takes money. We've never been successful on bringing, a BMW or a Mercedes-Benz. We've attempted, but it takes some substantive amount of state investment. And that's part of the educational process. Is the state willing to put in on a single transaction $100 million, $200 million to bring in a company that over several decades, probably on a 20-year return, would probably bring into the billions and billions to the economy of the state. Those are choices that we have to make as a state and our policymakers. That's part of the educational process. But it doesn't mean that we should stop. It means that we should actually work with you, work with our private sector, and figure out how do we properly educate and familiarize our elected leadership. I can tell you we are truly blessed, not because he's my boss. We're truly fortunate that we have a governor who is compassionate, who understands the importance of what? Business. Having been a successful self-made businessman, this is what he wants for Florida. His vision of our state is that everyone, not just big business, small business, that's your average mom and pop business, we all share in the what? In the growth, the success of our state. That's truly his goal, to improve the quality of life for all Floridians. Gosh, could you ask for anything more from a governor? I don't think you could.
Beautiful. Great. Okay, we're going to take questions. So we've got microphones here and microphones here. So come on up and step up and ask the question you want to ask. I'm going to lead it off with one question, and I'm going to turn the tables because I'm sure that everybody in this room has asked something of the four of you in the last year, and the last week, and the last day in our career. So I want you, and Bill, I'm going to lead with you on this. I'm going to ask you to take the lead on this. What is the one big ask or action step that you have for the audience today? What is it that you want this group to do to help us to be the leaders that you all have articulated of economic development, want our state to be number one? So real quick so we can get a couple questions in.
Sure, great question.
And please come up to the mics and ask your questions.
I don't think anyone in this room will be surprised. I think to join not just we at EFI, but to join everyone on the stage, because it's a joint effort, to really work with our elected leadership in Tallahassee, work with our legislators. You don't have to work with the governor. He gets it. He understands it. And many of our legislators do. But we need collectively to do a much better job. And that starts with us at EFI. We need to do a much better job familiarizing and providing the right information, the right supporting documentation to legislators so they'll fund a toolkit. The toolkit isn't for EFI, or it isn't for DEO. The toolkit is for us. The toolkit is for us to work with you, and we must collectively, if we want to be successful in January, this is going to be a very tough session coming up. It's going to be a very tough session. I think we're going to have to really work really extra hard together at the local, regional level. We can certainly provide you information in terms of what's happened over the last 4 or so years. You know, Grace Swope was there 4 years, a number of phenomenal successes. Jesse can talk to you about the number of jobs in the last 4.5 years that collectively we, under the leadership of Rick Scott, have been able to create in the state. That wasn't EFI doing that. That was EFI in partnership with you. And that number, Jesse, I saw last night was something like 879,000, something like that, Jesse?
Yep.
878. Every time the boss calls, I've already talked to him this morning. I talked to the governor probably, I don't know, at least 2, 3, sometimes 4 times a week. He's always excited. I mean, this is the governor of the state of Florida, always excited. He'll say, Bill, what's going on? He always says, what's going on? And you know, today we stand at 879,000 good paying jobs. We want more. And I think Chris is the one that said, we can't be complacent. Are we happy with 879? Rick Scott's not happy with 879. I'm not happy with 879. None of us are happy with 879. And so, you know, we figure it out. We figure out how we, on this stage, work closer together as colleagues, but again, with the objective of moving this state forward. Thank you.
Beautiful. Jesse? What's the ask?
Well, I think the ask is actually a motto I've had since I came to work for Governor Scott, both in the council's office and at DEO. And what I would ask everyone in this room is good policy, good government, economic growth. The fight for that, it's brick by brick, house by house. And so what I'd ask you is you have to fight every single fight. You can't take anything for granted, and you can't let the little things go. And so when your county commission is going to do something that's anti-growth, anti-business, even if it's small, you have to go in and be the voice for growth and economic development and business and pro-growth policies. You know, I came across recently, I was told of a local government that has, at the beginning of their business code, they say, to operate and run a business in this town is a privilege. And the privilege is granted to you by the government. Things like that are outrageous. It is outrageous that any government in this state would say something like that. You have to go be the voice of fighting mentalities like that. And so I would say, take nothing for granted, brick by brick, house by house. You have to fight this fight everywhere and all the time.
Chris, what's the ask?
Okay, well, I agree with both of these gentlemen. We have to educate our legislators, so we ask that you please do that. I agree with Jesse. You have to fight every single day. We're just in that kind of a competitive environment. But what I would ask of you is this, and maybe this is having been a legislator, but you can fight against something and you can fight for something. I'm a strong believer, and Bruce Ferguson and I talk about this a lot, and I told him I was going to say it publicly because I definitely want everybody in our regional workforce boards to hear this. I support local flexibility, and I support home rule. So you take educating your legislators along with fighting and fighting for something with local flexibility and home rule, and here's my ask. As economic developers, as workforce developers, as a new workforce development and economic development system that is broadly defined or redefined, I ask that you all work on a shared vision. Work collectively within your local communities and within your regions for a shared vision, and then go and implement that together. Hold yourselves accountable to one another for shared performance, shared outcomes. Because you know what? If you do that, and if you articulate that to your legislators who leave your local communities to go to Tallahassee to vote on this, then they're much more likely to fight for something than against something, because they're going to understand how you take all of these tools and this vision and you move it toward a new future for Florida that they can in turn sell to their constituents. Remember who the shareholder is. It's the taxpayers. How do they get elected? The taxpayers.
Great, thank you. And Frank, you're asked to make Space Florida #1.
Well, it's not about
your
Space
ask?
Florida as much as it is Florida, but the thing that I would ask, I think that with the governor, and we've all traveled with him, and the 4 organizations that are on the stage, we do a pretty good job of identifying opportunities that come from abroad or come from major companies in our target market sectors. And we'll bring those to the marketplace and do the best we can to compete for them. So the thing that I would ask all of you, though, is that sometimes the best deals come from the companies that we have in our local areas and in our regions, and we need to think regionally, because that's true not only for the companies that are here, but from those that are looking to relocate perhaps to Florida. They look at regional resources. reach out to us early, get us involved early. I just reorganized our BD department to put a more regional representation in place so that we're talking to you on a local basis, and we'll meet with local companies, if for no other reason than just to understand what their strategic growth plans are, and maybe to identify things that they're not even thinking about that could help them. And that kind of dialogue helps strengthen your relationship with them as well as ours. And when relocation or expansion opportunities do come up, clearly they're going to look to stay as opposed to leave. So that reaching out and getting aggressive, getting us active early, that's what I would ask.
Great. So what I heard from these 4 groups is connect with these folks, work with these folks, but take on your own responsibility, establish your shared vision, take on your own goals, and work hard at home to deliver the message of why what we're doing at the state and the local level is very important. I knew we had some questions, and we must be hungry for lunch because we've run out of time here, so we're going to dismiss on the Q&A. I apologize for that, but let's give our panelists a round of applause. This is an excellent session.